So the contents of this lecture. So in this lecture, we will discuss the following: the arrays and JSON. So under arrays, we have the definition of array, how to create an array, and how to use an array. For JSON, we have the definition of JSON and examples of the JSON. So let's go first to what is an array. So JavaScript arrays are used to store multiple values in a single array or a single variable. Okay, so you could think of an array in real life as a big box. So this box could contain multiple objects inside. So that's how array works. So instead of doing this, creating a variable for each cars. So for example, we have, or I ask you to declare a variable for these three cars here, Saab, Volvo, and BMW. So that would give you car 1, Saab, car 2, Volvo, and car 3 as BMW. So we could just simply create an array. So an array looks like this. So it has a keyword var for declaring variables, the name of the array, which is cars, and equal to. So I mean to say we're going to assign a value to cars. And then inside the open and close square brackets are the values of Saab, Volvo, and BMW. So I mean to say we have a collection of cars inside these cars. Okay, so here's the syntax for an array: var, and then the array name, which is cars, is equal to. So I mean to say we're going to assign a value to the array, and then inside the square brackets are the items. So it makes sense for using the square brackets. It's like a box that contains these items, or let's say collection of cars here. Okay, so how are we going to do that? Let's go in our functionality.js. So we have here the var, then cars is equal to Saab. So that's the first element. Separate by comma. The next one is Volvo. Then the third one is BMW. So that's it. And then you can also create an array and then provide the elements. So we could also assign a value to cars. Say for example, we didn't assign a value to array cars because we don't know which cars to put in our array yet. So as time goes on, for example, we want to add a type of cars, so we could just modify the elements of this cars array. So you can also create an array and then provide the elements. So cars 0, index 0 is equals to Saab, and then cars 1, index 1 is Volvo, and then cars 2 equal to BMW. Okay, so those are the cars. So the next one is, what are these numbers inside the square brackets? So these are what we call the index. So the index defines the position of these elements. Okay, so from our previous example, all arrays starts from the number 0 and then to the right up to infinity. Okay, so this sub here is from index 0, the Volvo is index 1, BMW is index 2, and so on. Say for example, if we want to create another type of car, so this would assign to 3, and then sample car. Not sure what kind of car is that. So let's say it's sample car. Okay, so how are we going to access this cars here? Okay, let's go back. Let's assign this inside our array to see how it works with the use of index. Okay. So Saab is index 0, Volvo is 1, BMW is 2, sample car is 3. So to check without using an element from our HTML, we could use the console.log in order to print some values from our JS file to our console. Say for example, we want to print cars and then with index 0. So this should display on the console of your web browser. So let's check. Let's refresh this page. Okay, so as the page loaded, the window on load event would trigger and would load all of these variables and console.log function. Okay, so once more. Then let's check the console. Okay, so it didn't display anything. Let's see. So there's no error here. I guess we didn't. Okay, so there's no script tag here yet. So that's why. So src is equal to functionality.js. And it should be a string. Okay. So let's see. Let's try to refresh this one. Okay, so Saab. So we need to say the index 0 or the first element of the cars is Saab. Next one is, this should be Volvo. Okay. So if you wanted to print all the cars, so we could use the for in variable x in cars. Okay. So let's say what is x here. Let us print what is x. So we know that cars is the collection of cars, Saab, Volvo, BMW, and sample car. But what is x? So let us print x. Okay, so x here represents the cars index. Okay, so in order for us to use x, we need to treat this as the index of cars inside the console.log. So what we're gonna do is to put cars inside the console.log and use x as its index. And once we refresh it, we have the Saab, Volvo, BMW, and sample car. So the for in is used to iterate inside the cars. So for in depends on the number of elements in the array. So I mean to say this for in would only run number of times depends on the number of cars. So if there are 4 elements in cars, this for in would execute this console.log here 4 times. Okay, and then the x here represents the index of cars. Okay, so here we use the for in. I hope that you understand how to use for in our array. Okay, let's move on. So this is just assigning the elements of the cars to another variable. So that should be easy for you to understand. Now, updating an array element. So let's say I have this for loop here. Let me copy this. And I want to change the first element of cars into Lambo. So for example, cars. So what is the position of Saab? All positions or index starts with 0. So I'm going to say I'm going to access the array at index 0 and replace it with a new one or a new element, which is Lambo. Okay. So the original is Saab, Volvo, BMW, and sample car. And then after this statement here, line 6, the new collection is Lambo, Volvo, and BMW and sample car. Okay, so that's for our array. Now let's move on to JSON. So what is JSON? So JSON stands for the JavaScript Object Notation. It is an open standard file format and data interchange format that uses human readable text to store and transmit data objects consisting of attribute, value pairs, and arrays. So in creating a JSON, we follow some syntax rules. So the data is in name value pairs. So you could think of the JSON or the JSON format or notation as a dictionary, wherein there's a name and value pair. So what is this name value pair? So the name in a dictionary, for example, that is the word. And then the value is the definition of that word. So that's why I told you that JSON is look like a dictionary in programming. Okay? We have the name, which is the word, and the value, which is the definition of that word. Okay? So it's a name value pair. So the data is separated by commas. Just like in arrays, we define each element, and then each element is separated by a comma. So curly braces hold objects. So I mean to say the elements inside the JSON, which is called the objects, are inside or enclosed inside the curly braces. So compared to an array, which is uses the square brackets to hold the array. JSON objects and JSON arrays. So JSON objects are written inside the curly braces, and objects can contain multiple name value pairs. So here's an example definition or declaration of the object. So my obj is equal to, so open and close curly brace, we have the first name, and then what is the first name? It's John, separated by comma. So I mean to say this is the first set of name value pair. So once we access the first name, it would give you the name of John. And then we have the last name for this one. Last name is Doe. Okay. So the example above has two properties or name, first name and last name. So to access the value in our object, you have to specify the name of the object variable, followed by a dot, and then the name of property. Okay, so let's try to use the console.log, and then of course the name of the object, the my obj. So this is the name of the object, my obj. And then it says here that it is followed by a dot, so say dot, and then the name that you want to access its value. So the name here is first name or last name. So let's say I want to display John. So first name. So let's check. So here we have John. How about we access the last name? Okay. John Doe. Okay. So the next one, the data can be modified. So for example, we have an existing obj or object. We want to change the first name, so into Steve. Okay, so let's see how we're going to do that. My obj that first name then is equal to what? Steve. Okay, and then let's try this one. So the original is John Doe. After this line number 4 here, after assigning Steve to the first name, it would become Steve Doe. Okay, so that's it. So what's next? We have here the JSON or array inside the JSON. So we have the first name, last name. So let me type this first. Okay, so now I have this new object which contains 3 employees or 3 first name. 3 employees. Let me change this one. 3 employees, John, Anna, and Peter. So how are we going to access this? So to access the first name, we have this syntax here. So this would access the details of John. Okay, so let's see how we're going to use that. So again, to print console.log, and then it says here we have to call for the object name, and the object name is my obj. Okay, and then inside the my obj is the employees. So remember that this is a combination of JSON, and inside the JSON is an array, and inside an array is another JSON objects. Okay, so JSON from the outside, so it has a employees name. Okay, so let us try to access this my obj employees. So what is the output of my obj and then employees? So let's see. It has 3 objects. So for index 0, it has first name John, last name Doe. Index 1 has um, Anna and Smith. 2 is Peter and Jones. Okay, so let's try to use this. It says here that from index 0, it has first name John and Doe, last name Doe, sorry. So let us use the index 0. So for using the index 0, of course, we have to include the open, close square bracket. So indicate the index. It's either 1 or 0 or 1 or 2. Depends on the positioning. So this is 0, this is 1, and this is 2. Okay? Let's specify the index 0. So let's see what would be the output. So it's just first name John, last name Doe. So I want to access John as our output. So for using an object name, we have to include a dot. So what is the dot? Or what are we going to access? The first name or last name? So that's the first name, of course. So that's John. Okay? So as we start from here, my obj employees, and then we access the index 0, and then that first name. So that's John. So what is the value of my obj? So let's see. It's the employees. That contains 3 employees. And inside the array of employees, it has 3 index 0, 1, 2. Okay? So we're just filtering out the details of this obj here. Okay? And then for us to add a new employee from the group of employees here, we just need to use this code below. Okay, so in our case, let us try. So it says here the obj or the name of the object. So my obj dot then employee, or this should be employees, not just an employee. So employees that push. So this is a function in order for us to add a new element here. So let me copy this one. Okay, so let me add myself. So I hope that this code doesn't produce an error because it includes my name. So should work. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so there's no error, but it doesn't display anything. Well, of course, we should actually put a console.log first. So console.log my obj that employee. So let's see what's inside the employees array of objects. So there are 4 arrays. So we have the first name John, last name Doe, first name Anna, last name Smith, first name Peter, last name Jones, first name Ludwig, and then last name Sankon. Okay, so let's use this. So let's try to create a new HTML. So let's save this one as the reg, for example reg, or index2. So index2.html. Okay, so let's replace it, and then here let us copy the index.html and just remove the other parts of this index2.html. Lost your password and don't have an account. Okay, so we have an index2 here which only accepts the username and password. Okay, so for example, we want to redirect this lost your password or don't have an account to index2.html. So we just need to indicate that on our href. Okay, so let's see. So the don't have an account here is this one. So once we click this, we are in our index2.html. So once we click the submit, it should go back to index.html. So to do that, the form actions should specify the index.html. So let's try it again. Submit. So it goes back to login form. Don't have an account, goes to HTML2 or index2. Once we submit, it goes back to the login form. Okay, so the next one is to use the text box, username and password. So how are we going to get the value inside of it? Okay, so we have here, let me remove this one. I have here the var btn1 is equals to the document that get element by id. Okay, so what is the id of this button? So the button here is it doesn't have an id, so make one. So ID is equal to, let's say, B1. Should be B1, and then var T1 is equals to, let me get this one. Oops. So var T2 is equals to, of course, what is the ID of this two? Text and also the pass. So the T1 or text box 1 is the text, and then this one is the pass. So maybe we should change this into user, means its username. Okay, so username. So let's see. So the button or btn that onClick is equal to the function, or in this function we are going to wait, let's create first a variable for an array. So equals to nothing, and then inside the array, so there's nothing, and then here in T1, once the btn is clicked, we will just put the ARR index 0 for the first user, the T1, oops, T1 that value, oops, T1 that value plus T2 that value. Okay. So this is the user one. So let's check. Let us have the console.log. Console.log. Okay. So console.log should put the ARR 0. Oops. This should be inside the btn onClick. Okay. So originally the array doesn't have a value, but once we click this button, it would get the users T1 and T2. Let's see how this works. So the array doesn't have anything inside. So let's say I have this Ludovic, then Sancon. Once I click the submit button, says here ASD. So as you can see, the inputs are being recorded. Okay, so once we click the submit, it's recorded, but it refreshes the page, so that's why it's cleared. Okay, but inside in our array, it's already recorded. Okay, so that's for the register. So we register an account. So I just tried it um, in our login form. Okay, so you should put some ID on it, and then um, try to check on how we're going to manipulate that using JSON. Okay, so that's it for now. Thank you and God bless.